At my baby shower, Greer raised her glass and smiled the way she always did at events she had planned herself, like she was stepping into a spotlight she'd measured in advance. "To my sister," she said, "who fought through the hard months, the quiet, dark ones she doesn't like to talk about, who took her prescription and her heating pad and her very patient husband and got herself through to the other side." The room went quiet. She was looking at me. 22 women were looking at me. I was 29 weeks pregnant, standing on the carpet of my parents' living room in Oakville, and my sister had just told every person in that house that I had been on medication for anxiety. A detail I had shared with my GP, with my OB at the hospital, and with my mother on a January walk in the rain when I needed to say it out loud to someone. I looked across the room at Gideon. He was near the back hallway with a cup of tea he hadn't touched yet. He was already looking at me. That was when I noticed the leather portfolio half slide out from under the gift table. Greer must have bumped it when she crouched to fix the tablecloth earlier. The flap had fallen open just enough to show a corner of printed letterhead, two-tone, blue and gray, with a small logo I couldn't make out from where I stood. I took a photo on my phone. I sent it to Gideon without a word. He stepped out to the back deck. He called back in 40 seconds. His voice was the kind of quiet that takes effort. "Taryn." A pause. "Don't let her pick that bag up. Don't let her out the front door. I need to tell you who my sister was before that afternoon, because I spent 32 years thinking I understood her. My name is Taryn Aldred. I'm 31 years old. I work as a physiotherapist out of a clinic on Brant Street in Burlington, the kind of place that smells like liniment and has a whiteboard in the waiting room tracking a half-marathon training challenge. I spend my days sitting across from people who are in pain, and I have learned a lot about what a person carries without knowing they're carrying it." That morning, the Saturday of the shower, Gideon made eggs the way he always does when he knows the day is going to be complicated. Over medium, rye toast, sliced tomatoes. He's a senior planner with the region, which means he reads demographic forecasts for fun and owns more highlighters than anyone I've ever known. He had his laptop open even while he cooked, and a yellow legal pad beside it with 3 bullet points already filled in. I was sitting at the kitchen table, finishing documentation notes from the week. I had a patient, a 70-year-old man who'd had a hip replacement in March, and I wanted his progress notes clean before the weekend pulled me sideways. Gideon slid a plate next to my laptop and kissed my temple. 27 kilometers, he said. That's how far we live from my parents' house. He has driven it so many times he narrates the traffic on the QEW the way other people narrate weather. My phone lit up, a text from Greer. "Got the charcuterie arranged. Did you mention the parking situation to Linnea? The neighbors get prickly after noon." I had told Linnea about the parking situation once, at a birthday dinner in April. Greer had not been there. I set my phone face down. Gideon saw me do it. He can read my gestures the way I read a patient's gait. The whole conversation is in the details. He said, "Everything okay?" I said Greer was just triple-checking logistics. He spread butter on his toast without looking up. He said, "She's been triple-checking a lot of things lately." He wasn't wrong. For the past 6 weeks, Greer had been doing small things that each looked like kindness if you examined them one at a time. She'd shown up on a Tuesday with a meal-prepped tray of something she said was good for iron. She'd offered to come to my 30-week appointment, because Gideon had a regional council meeting. She had messaged my midwife's office directly. I knew because the reception coordinator mentioned it, to ask about sibling support plans for the postpartum period. I had told myself it was love. Greer had been through hard things. 2 miscarriages in 2020. A diagnosis in 2021 telling her she wouldn't carry a pregnancy of her own. A quiet divorce from Dex finalized the following winter. She had rebuilt her life around Jory, her adopted son, 11 years old, a kid who spoke in full paragraphs and preferred nature documentaries to almost everything else. She had rebuilt herself. She deserved to feel like part of this. That's what I told myself. Gideon set his pen down. He said, "If anything feels off today, just look at me, that's all. Look at me and I'll come." I told him he was being dramatic. He said he had been dramatic about my family for 3 years and had never once been wrong. He set my phone on the charger next to my keys. He put his own phone beside it. He said both full batteries, just in case. I put on the navy wrap dress my mother had suggested because it photographed well. I wore the bracelet Greer had given me at my university graduation, fine silver, a small bird charm. I had worn it every day for 9 years. I would think about it differently before nightfall. We drove up to Oakville with a fruit tart from the bakery on Brant in the back seat. My parents' house is on a crescent off Lakeshore Road, the kind of neighborhood where the gardens are tended and the driveways are resealed every other fall. I know which step on the porch creaks. I know which drawer in the kitchen sticks in summer. We arrived at 1:30. The party was set for 2. Greer was already there. She was in the kitchen in a white linen shirt, and she had arranged the borrowed folding tables herself and labeled every serving dish with a tent card in her handwriting. On her shoulder was a leather portfolio bag I had never seen before, structured. A long zip across the top. It sat heavy against her hip, the way a bag sits when it's full of paper. She saw me and opened her arms. "You look incredible," she said. "Don't let anyone make you stand too long." Jory was in the corner of the living room near the window, holding his iPad. He looked up when I came in and raised one hand. Not quite a wave, more like an acknowledgement, like he'd been waiting for me to arrive and now I had. I thought he was tired. He was always a little quiet at family gatherings. If you have ever watched a child try to reach the only adult in the room they trusted and missed it, you already know how this part of the story ends. Drop a comment if someone in your own life once tried to warn you in a way you didn't understand until later. I read every one of those. By 1:50, the house was full. Linnea arrived with a gift wrapped in brown paper and handed me a bottle of sparkling water the moment she walked in. She's my oldest friend from university, a speech-language pathologist now, and she has the specific skill of reading a room in under 10 seconds. She held me a beat longer than usual at the door. My mother worked the entry with the warmth she reserves for events she has helped organize. She remembered names and refilled glasses before they were empty. She is good at parties. She has always been good at managing how things appear. At 1:55, Greer set the leather portfolio down in the narrow gap between the gift table and the living room wall. She crouched to adjust the tablecloth. The bag shifted. The flap opened. I didn't see it then. I was talking to my father's old colleague near the window. At 2 o'clock, someone called for the toast. Greer was already holding her glass. She spoke for about 2 minutes. The first 90 seconds were fine. She talked about the age gap between us, how much she'd looked forward to becoming an aunt. Then she pivoted. Her voice softened in the particular way people's voices soften when they want you to know they're being sincere. She said, "To my sister, who fought through the hard months. The quiet, dark ones she doesn't talk about. The prescription that helped her through the worst of it. She is braver than she knows." The room shifted. I heard Linnea set her glass down. My mother, in the kitchen doorway, was very still. Greer raised her glass. She was smiling at me. Her eyes were bright. And I understood in that moment, with the kind of clarity that bypasses the brain and goes straight to the body, that she had not said those things out of love. She had said them to put something on record. In front of witnesses. I looked at Gideon. He was already looking at me. I took a photo of the portfolio on the floor and sent it to his phone without a word. He walked to the back deck. He called me 40 seconds later. His voice was careful in a way I had never heard before. "Taryn, I know that logo. That's Brockton Investigative Group. They do family and domestic cases, custody documentation, surveillance packages. I've seen their letterhead come through a regional file. That is not a personal planner." A pause. "Do not let her take that bag." If your stomach just tightened the way mine did, like and subscribe so the people who need this story can find their way here. I went upstairs. I said I needed to lie down for a few minutes. The baby was pressing on my ribs, and nobody stopped me. I sat on the edge of the guest bed. The quilt on it was one my mother had made for me at 14, all the seams perfectly straight. Gideon came in 9 minutes later with the portfolio in his hand. He had told my mother he was getting napkins from the car. Linnea met us in the hallway without asking any questions. She said, "Tell me what you need." Gideon set the portfolio on the guest bed and unzipped it. Inside was a printed document set, clipped and tabbed with adhesive labels. The front page had a file reference number, the Brockton Investigative Group header, and the words Subject, Aldred T. Assessment Period, March 2024 present. I work in healthcare. I write clinical documentation. I know exactly what an assessment file looks like. Gideon opened the first tab, Medical. There was a printed summary of a phone call, the caller identified as G. Aldred, designated support contact, placed to my OB's office on April 3rd. The administrative note said the caller had requested information about my high-risk designation and postpartum mental health flag. I do not have a high-risk designation. I am a straightforward pregnancy with a history of managed generalized anxiety. There is no flag. Greer had called and tried to manufacture one. Behind it, a list of questions submitted in a follow-up email from an address I didn't recognize. Questions about my medication dosage, questions about my support network stability. A note in the margin in blue pen, not forthcoming. Try midwife team next. Gideon turned to the second tab, Residential. A signed lease agreement. A 2-bedroom unit at 14 Harbor Gate Court in Bronte, West Oakville, 2.3 kilometers from our house in Burlington. Move-in date, the same week Gideon had a planning conference in Ottawa. Monthly rent, $2,400, lease term, 6 months, renewable. In the margin in her handwriting, week 32, G arrives, postpartum window opens. My 32-week mark was in 19 days. Gideon said, very quietly, "She was going to come to your house while I was away. She was going to offer to stay a night, then a few nights, then a week. She was going to make herself necessary, and then she was going to document everything, your sleep, your medication, how you were coping, until she had enough." I said, "Enough for what?" He turned to the third tab, Legal Framework. Printed excerpts from Ontario Family Law. Sections on extended family applications under the Children's Law Reform Act. A handwritten note beside a highlighted paragraph. A business card clipped to the page. A family law solicitor in Mississauga. Jory appeared in the doorway. He was holding his iPad in both hands, the way he held things he was careful with. He said, "Aunt Taryn." I copied everything I could find when she left the files open. He looked at the floor. "I've been doing it since February. I didn't know who would believe me." He held out the iPad. On the screen was a Google Photos album, 47 images, printed documents photographed at an angle from across a desk, same letterhead, dates going back 8 months. He said, "My school account, Halton gives us Google Workspace. She doesn't know the password." Linnea made a sound I will not try to describe. Gideon set the iPad down carefully. He said, "You did exactly right, Jory, every single thing." I called my Aunt Vita next. She is my father's older sister, the one who stopped being invited to Christmas in 2022 after she asked my mother, directly, why Greer seemed to know so much about my personal appointments. She picked up on the second ring. She said, "I have been keeping a document since January 2023, Taryn, a Google Doc. 31 entries." A pause. "I told your mother at Easter. She told me I was reading into things. She said Greer had been through enough already." She read me 4 of the entries. The third one stopped me cold. Greer had contacted my previous therapist's office in 2023. A therapist I'd seen at university in Guelph, someone I hadn't thought about in 7 years, trying to obtain records under the pretense of being a family emergency contact. The 4th entry, Vita had seen a folder in my mother's spare room closet, partially open, with what appeared to be printed correspondence. My mother had closed the door before Vida could see more. I handed the phone to Linnea and went down the hall. The spare room closet door was unlocked. On the upper shelf, behind a shoebox, 3 notebooks, dark blue, spiral-bound, each one labeled in my mother's handwriting. Greer, Observations. 2015-2018, Greer Observations. 2019-2022, Taryn Observations. 2020-present. I opened the third one first. The first page was dated February 14, 2020. Below it, a list of 11 observations about me, my weight at the time. A note about a difficult phone call I'd had with my mother that she had apparently transcribed word for word. In the margin, emotionally reactive. Will need structure in a crisis. I turned pages. Appointment dates I recognized. Notes from conversations I'd forgotten having. A description of Gideon at Christmas 2021. Distant, distracted, possible strain in the marriage. We had been entirely fine that Christmas. The last entry was 6 weeks ago. The week I'd told my mother about my anxiety prescription on a walk in the rain. She had written down the medication name, the dosage, and below it, shared with Greer, relevant for documentation. I sat on the edge of the spare room bed. Then I picked up the first notebook, Greer Observations, 2015-2018. My sister was 23 in 2015. That was the year she got married. I turned to the middle of the book, a page from April 2017. My mother's assessment of Greer's emotional state after a miscarriage, not a diary entry, an assessment. Organized under subheadings, observed behavior, likely trajectory, risk to family cohesion. Below it, Greer responds well to being needed, redirect this, do not allow dependency. In 2018, on a page written after Greer's fertility diagnosis, my mother had made a column under the heading Opportunities. One item read, T, may attempt pregnancy within 5 years. Position G as essential support in advance. I put the notebook down. I sat for a moment with my hand on my stomach. Then I carried all 3 notebooks downstairs. Greer was in the living room, looking for her portfolio. I watched her check the side of the gift table, then the kitchen counter, then press her hand flat against the wall the way you do when you've lost your balance. She saw me come in with the notebooks. Her face did something I had never seen it do before. Not guilt exactly, recognition. Gideon stood beside the coffee table with the open portfolio. Linnea was near the window. Jory had come downstairs and stood behind the armchair, near the hallway without speaking. Vida's voice came through Linnea's phone on speaker. My mother stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms at her sides. Greer looked at the notebooks. She looked at the portfolio. She looked at Jory. She said, "That's not what it looks like." Gideon opened the lease to the page with the handwritten margin note. He held it toward her without saying anything. She said, "I was going to be there for you. You're going to need help after the baby comes. Gideon travels, and you would never ask me." I said, "You called my OB's office." She went still. I said, "You tried to get my records from Guelph. You emailed my midwife team." She looked at my mother. My mother didn't speak. Greer said, "Mom, tell them." My mother said nothing. I set the 3 notebooks on the coffee table, third one on top, then the other 2 beside it. "These are yours," I said to Greer, "not mine." She looked at the spines. She went very still. I said, "She did to you what you were trying to do to me. You should know that. And she should know that everyone in this room knows it now." Greer reached out and touched the corner of the first notebook. Her hand was shaking. She opened it to the first page and read. She turned 3 more pages and stopped. Her breath caught. My mother said her name, once, then twice. Greer closed the notebook. She stood. She picked up her leather portfolio and walked to the front door. I didn't stop her. My father came into the doorway. He looked at the table, then at me, then somewhere past both of us. He said, "You didn't have to do this today." I said, "I didn't start it today." He went back to the kitchen. I heard the fridge open. The front door closed behind Greer, quietly, the way doors close when someone has nothing left to slam. Vita's voice came through Linea's phone. I love you, Taryn. Tell Jory I'm proud of him. Then she hung up. Jory said from behind the armchair, Can I ride home with you guys? I said yes. We drove back down the QEW to Burlington with Jory in the back seat, his iPad face down on his lap. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. The 21 days that followed were the quietest I can remember. On Monday, I called my OB's office and removed Greer's name from every contact list. I asked them to flag her as someone not authorized to receive any information about my care. The coordinator said, Thank you for telling us, in the way people say it when they've heard something like that before. On Wednesday, Gideon sat at his laptop and wrote a piece for the planning blog he'd run for 3 years, the one about housing policy and urban structure that has a modest following and no drama whatsoever. He didn't use any names. He wrote about the legal framework in Ontario that allows extended family members to build custodial claims, and about the investigative services industry that markets that process as family support. He sent it to me before posting. I read it twice. I said, Publish it. On Friday, a letter arrived from Greer's solicitor. A single paragraph. She would not be pursuing any formal claim. She was releasing the Harbor Gate court lease at a financial penalty. There was no apology. There was no other explanation. The following Tuesday, Vita drove up from St. Catharines and sat in our kitchen for 2 hours without saying much. She helped me wash the bottles and pump parts I'd been sterilizing, and told me about the summer she and my father had taken the bus to visit cousins in Sudbury when she was 12. A story I had never heard. I asked her why she'd kept the Google Doc for 3 years without telling me. She said she hadn't known what telling me would cost, or whether I would believe her. She said she had waited for the right moment and it had never come, so she had just kept writing it down. She said, someone had to remember. If I couldn't fix it, at least I could remember it accurately. Jory asked to stay with us on a Saturday morning. He said it sideways, the way 11-year-olds deliver important things, while looking at something else entirely, in a voice pitched just low enough to be deniable. He said, I think I'd be okay here, if that's okay with you. I said yes. Gideon sorted the paperwork with the Halton School Board on Monday. Jory brought one backpack, a bin of books, and a hand-drawn map of our neighborhood that he'd made from memory on graph paper. He chose the room at the end of the hall. He asked if he could leave the door open at night. We said yes. He tried things out slowly. He asked what time we usually ate dinner. He asked whether he could keep his toothbrush in the upstairs bathroom. He asked if he had to check in when he went to the park at the end of the street, and we said yes, just a text, and he nodded like that was reasonable. He ate dinner with us, and then sometimes took a plate to the couch after, because the couch was where he'd slept the first night, and it was still where he felt safest. We let him. He didn't need to be tested. He needed to be believed. He asked me once, on the second Sunday, if he could sign up for a summer soccer program. He had never played on a team. I called the Halton Recreation office that Monday and paid for the full session. When I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and cried for the first time since the shower, not because it was sad. Because it was a simple thing, a child, a team, a summer, and it had taken this long. Share this with someone who needs to hear that a door can be left open on purpose. Subscribe so the next family who needs it can find their way here. On the last Sunday of June, we finished the nursery. Gideon assembled the crib on the rug. Jory painted a small tree on the wall above the change table, careful, deliberate, with a fine brush he'd brought himself. Linnea came for dinner and stayed for 3 hours. I put a photograph on the shelf near the window. Gideon and me at Rattlesnake Point last fall. Linnea at our kitchen table the morning of a snowstorm. Vita in the garden at her house in St. Catharines. Jory on our front steps holding his map. People who had seen me, not watched me, seen me. There were no photographs in that room of the people who had kept notes. I stood at the window with my hand on my stomach. The street was quiet. Nobody in the driveway. Nobody at the fence. Gideon came in and stood beside me. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, whatever she was building, It doesn't live in here. You decide what lives in here. That night, I turned the porch light on before we went to bed. I don't know exactly when I decided to leave it on every night after that. I just did. And I have not turned it off since.